Hi everybody, my name's Yvette. I'm coming to you from Yvette Marie's Fine Arts and Crafts. Today I'm going to show you how to use the Lion brand Imagine Ruffle yarn to make this ruffle scarf. It is similar in concept to some of the other ruffle scarves that are out there, or the other ruffle yarns. Some of them have pom-poms or fringe or fuzzy borders and things like that, and they have some of them, the holes are a lot bigger. Some of them, like this one here, one of the original ones, which is the sachet, Red Heart sachet, holes are a little bit smaller and it just has a little bit of a sparkle border on the edges. This one here is a lot thicker, fluffier, fuzzier, and it's got a sparkle. I'm not sure if you can see the sparkle going through it, but it's got a sparkle thread through the whole thing just to give it a little bit of a shimmer when it's completed. All three of these are knitted, and they're all similar, but just a little bit different in their variation. What you're going to need for today's project is your Imagine yarn, and you're going to need some knitting needles. Today I'm going to be using a wooden knitting needle, size 10. You can use a size 8, 9, or 10 for this particular project. You just want your knitting needle to be able to work comfortably into the holes that are already provided for you here, like so. You don't want the knitting needle to be too big, because then it just kind of gets caught when you're working with your yarn and trying to put the two knitting needles together as you're knitting. So if you want to grab some knitting needles and your yarn, I'll show you how to work this project. Before we get started though, I'm just going to give you a tip on when you first buy your yarn. I'll just give you an example with the Red Heart Sachet brand. Your yarn is going to come in a big ball. And what I recommend is to unroll the whole thing and just roll it over a paper towel or a toilet paper roll, or just by itself like this here. I just kind of rolled it over itself. Stretching out your yarn as you roll like this here. Now it takes about half an hour, maybe 40 minutes or so to do this, but it will save a lot of time in the end when you actually start working your project and working your scarf. It makes it a lot faster to work because your yarn is already somewhat stretched out for you, so you're just looking for that row of holes to kind of work into instead of having to stretch it as you work it every few inches or every couple feet. Okay, so the Lion brand Imagine yarn, when it comes in your skein and you start opening it up, it's going to kind of look like this here. It's going to be pretty skinny, and you're just going to have to pull it apart a little bit to see all the holes. The Lion brand Imagine yarn is actually made in a tube. You can stick your hand right inside that tube like this. So there really is no top or bottom that you're going to be working into, unlike the Sachet brand and some of the other ones that actually have those fuzzy borders or borders on them where you have to work into a top track or a bottom track. You actually have, separate tracks. This one, you're just going to pick an area and start working in it. So what I normally do at the beginning is I'll just tie a small knot, make sure it's really tight, and then cut off any remaining on the edge and leave about half an inch or so, maybe a finger width at the most, like that there. Okay, now you're going to start your knitting with your knitting needles, and I'm going to cast on 6 stitches. Now this whole knitting process is probably going to be pretty easy for you. You'll catch on pretty quickly if you're a seasoned knitter. If you've never done any knitting before, I'm going to knit a couple rows for you so that you can work with me, and then you can just keep working the same rows repeatedly until the end of the scarf, and you'll actually be able to complete this project without never having knitted before. So I will go a little bit slowly for people who are working this for the first time. Okay, So what you're going to do to cast on your stitches is you're going to be working from the back of the yarn back here. You're going to get fairly close to the edge of this knot area here, and you're going to pick up your 6 stitches. So I'm going to skip this first little one here because it's a little bit close to that knot. So I'm going to go into the second area here that I'm finding, and you're just going to grab 3 or 4 strands of yarn. So I'm just going to grab this extra one here with it to make it a little more secure. So you're just going to go in from behind and grab those stitches or those strands of yarn on your needle. You don't have to skip a specific amount of stitches. I usually just kind of eyeball it, and I'll go about another 1.5 inches or 2 inches or so and grab that next area of stitches about 1.5 inches or 2 away, again from behind. So you're just going to wrap your needle backwards a little bit and kind of catch onto those stitches like that. Find an area that's about 2 inches away, 1.5 inches or 2 inches away, and you can just wrap your needle back into that area there from behind, grabbing a couple more strands of yarn. 3 or 4 strands is fine. Now we've got 3 stitches on our needle, so loosen up your yarn a little bit more. Another 2 inches or so away, go in from behind, put your needle in. You've got 4 stitches. We're going to do the same thing for the next 2, maybe 2 inches away or so. Grab 3 or 4 strands and 1 more. So now we've got a total of 6 stitches cast on our knitting needle, and that's the 6 stitches that I use to make the scarf that you see here. So once you've done that, you're just going to place your knitting needle in your left hand. Now I am right-handed, so I will be creating this video with right hand. I hope that lefties are able to understand it easily enough and be able to do the same thing with your left hand. I apologize, I don't have a left-handed video. I don't know if I will. Some patterns I can work left-handed a little bit easier than others. Excuse me. Okay, so you're going to see that your knot is right here. This is going to be covered up when we work our rows. We're going to be working in such a fashion that we're going to be creating basically circles over and over and over itself as we knit, and this is going to be completely covered up at the end and you won't see it. It's going to be tucked way up inside the ruffles and it will definitely not show. Okay, so to knit your scarf, we're going to excuse me, use the same type of process that you actually use to knit when you use regular yarn. The only difference is these holes are already created for you so that you can cast on your stitches instead of actually having to do a cast on with your stitches, with your yarn. So we're going to go ahead and start off by finding that first hole, and we're going to take our right hand needle and we're going to place it inside that hole and just crisscross the needles over so that you've got your needle inside the hole here and crisscrossed over to the back. Now you're going to grab your working yarn, which is this big long strand attached to your skein, and you're going to find a hole that's going to be maybe 2 inches away, 1.5 inches or 2 inches, and you're just going to grab a few strands and you're going to take it and just gently wrap it around that back needle. You're going to catch that yarn on that back needle, making sure it stays on there as you pull the needle between where you actually placed it originally. You're just going to bring it back through and catching this yarn you just placed on the needle, and then you're going to lift off the other needle. So now you've got this little strand here that you placed around the back needle stuck on your needle, and that creates your first stitch. This is what we're going to do for the rest of the row and for each subsequent row as well. So again, working your second stitch, you see there's a nice big hole here. We're going to take your needle and just place it directly in that hole. I'm going to use my finger to hold this back here. You're going to take your yarn another 1.5 inches or 2 away. You're just going to work your needle into a few strands, grab a few strands with your back needle, catching that yarn, bring it through, back through the front, and lift off those stitches from the left needle. So now you've got 2 stitches on the right needle that you've worked, and you still have 4 on your left needle. So we're just going to continue the same process to the end of the row. Finding the hole, place your needle over underneath, or excuse me, place your needle through that hole, crisscrossing your needles. Another 1.5 or 2 away on your working yarn, and just grab a few strands, wrap it over the back, catching it on that right hand needle, pulling it back through the center, and lifting off the left needle. So we've got 3 on this and 3 on the left now. Okay, so we're going to continue working in the same fashion. Needle through the center, find another area of stitches, another 1.5 or 2 away again. Just grab a few of those stitches, place them on that back needle, catching them, bring it back through, and lift off. Okay, so now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 on the right hand side, 2 left on the left hand side. So we'll work our 5th stitch in the same manner through the center. Now when you're working to find those few strands of yarn a couple inches away, you can use this needle here in the back to just kind of go like this and pick up your stitches. You don't have to use your hand to try to separate these stitches over here and open it up like this. Once you get working comfortably, you can just kind of grab your yarn, take your needle, and then just find 3 or 4 strands and just go like this, and then just catch it with your needle and then pull it back through and lift off. Find whatever is comfortable for you to work with. That makes it easy and quick for you to get your project finished and completed correctly and securely. Okay, so now we've got our last stitch, so we're going to go ahead and do the same thing, working through that center hole, grabbing a few strands, just grab a few strands, put it over the back needle, catching that yarn again like this here, catching it, pulling it through, lift off. So now you have no stitches left on your left hand needle. So now you've got your first row completed. Now I've already gone ahead and pulled some of my yarn out. If you haven't stretched your yarn out at this point, it may not look this long and this deep. This is something you can do after you've worked a few rows or even the whole scarf. You might have your yarn still kind of this thin where it's in a narrow strip where you haven't stretched everything out. So now you're just going to repeat that row again, and I'll do another row for you, and then I will show you how to cast off or finish your scarf here in just a moment. Okay, so now we're just going to work another row. Same process as the whole first row. We're going to get to that first stitch, go in through the center of the yarn here, grab a few strands over the back, come through and lift off. Same thing for the second stitch. So you can see the hole there. Put your needle inside the hole. Couple inches away, just grab a few strands with your needle and lift off. Okay, third stitch, grab a few strands around that back needle, fourth stitch, grab a few strands, fifth stitch, and the last stitch. Oops. Okay. So So now you've got 2 full rows, not including that first row that you cast on your needle. And you're going to see that since we're going around in a circle, you've got this where it's overlapping itself and we're working in a spiral shape, and we're going to keep doing that for the whole scarf. So you'll see that your beginning knot here is completely covered up inside, up here, inside your layers. And again, it will not show when your scarf is completed. Just like this one here is the completed scarf. You can't see the knot, it's way up inside that hole there. And when it's done, it looks like this. Okay? Alright, so you're just going to keep working your entire scarf in the same fashion that we just did these first 2 rows. Now, when you get to a point where you're going to need to add another skein of yarn, and I do recommend another skein of yarn, at least 1 or 2 skeins of yarn when making this particular scarf. When you do that, you're going to need to combine 2 skeins of yarn together. In order to do that, it's very easy. When you're working your skeins of yarn, you're just going to take one area here, another area here. Here's your 2 skeins of yarn. This represents 2 separate skeins. And you're just going to overlap them like this by a couple inches. 2 to 3 inches is plenty. Just stretch it out a little bit. Line up some of your holes. And you're just going to work this as if it were one layer, but you're just going to work through both layers like this here. So you're going to end up having your 2 layers on your needle. Now, before you actually combine the 2 skeins, there's a couple things you can do to hide this fray area here like this. You can tie knot in each end, or you can take a piece of thread or even like an embroidery floss in a similar color. You can scrunch this area up here, leaving about a ½ inch or so. You can take a piece of embroidery floss or thread, wrap it tightly multiple times around this area here, scrunching it together, and then tying it off really securely. And that way when you crisscross your 2 areas of yarn, you've got this little neat area here that's going to hide inside of your scarf, and it won't show either. But it just makes it a little more secure, because sometimes these edges tend to fray a little bit like this here, and so you don't want to have to worry about that happening with your scarf or anything like that. So it just makes it a little bit more secure, and it gives it a nicer, more finished look so you don't see it by just tying off those 2 ends, and then once you crisscross them, you've got those 2 ends tied off. Again, it really doesn't make a big difference in your scarf as well. You won't even notice it. Okay, so now I'm just going to show you quickly how to finish your scarf once you put finish your scarf to the end. I do recommend 2 to 3 skeins of yarn for the scarf. This particular scarf is almost 1 full skein, and it is only about 1 yard long. 1 full skein of this particular yarn only makes about 1 yard, and it's not even enough to wrap around your neck. So I recommend 2 to 3 skeins to make a full scarf. Okay, so when you finish your scarf, there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can use knitting needles to cast off or bind off, or you can use a knitting needle with a crochet hook to cast off. Basically, what you're doing is you're going to be knitting your stitches. Well, let me just show you. Okay, so when you are casting off, and this is also similar to casting off with regular yarn, if you're not doing a stretchy cast off, stretchy bind off, you're going to work in sets of 2, multiples of 2 with your stitches. So you're just going to knit a stitch like you did before, and knit a second stitch like you did before for your whole scarf. Once you have 2 stitches on your right hand needle, what you're going to do is you're going to take this farthest stitch on the back and you're going to lift it over this stitch and over the end of the needle, making sure that this stitch that's closest to the end stays on your needle very carefully. So you're just going to kind of hold this stitch on here, lift the farthest stitch over the stitch and over the end of the needle like so, leaving that one stitch on the needle, and this stitch is the one that just came off up and over the other stitch. You'll see this, and you'll see it a little more clear in a minute when I show you a couple more stitches done. Now you can either do it with your needles, or you can take this right hand needle, switch it out for a crochet hook of a similar size, and it makes it a little bit easier. I'm just going to transfer this one stitch carefully to a crochet hook, and I'm going to show you what I mean. This is how I do a regular standard cast off or bind off when I'm knitting, because it makes it so much easier. You're going to pretend this knitting or this crochet hook is a knitting needle. So you're going to do the same thing you did before, pretend you're using it as a knitting needle and just knit a stitch, go in from behind, use your hook to catch a few of those stitches, come through, lift off. Same thing you've been doing for your entire scarf. Only difference is now you have this handy little hook to catch that stitch on that you're working with, and this is going to go over the whole end of the hook and over the stitch much more easy this way. So you're going to catch it, and you're just going to twist the needle and catch it like this and pull that stitch through. So now you've got, it's a little bit more difficult to see here, but you've got two stitches that you've cast off here. They look like a little loop. Let's try one more and I'll show it to you even better. So now you're going to notice I've got one stitch over here, three over here. Again, we're going to place one more stitch, knit one more stitch onto the crochet hook, and we've got a multiple of two again. We're going to catch the stitch closest to the end on the hook in the hook, and we're just going to pull through the other stitch. Okay? So now you're going to see the three stitches a little bit more clear. 1, 2, 3 that we've cast off, and we've still got our fourth stitch here on the needle or on the hook. So that's 4, 5, and 6. So we're going to work one more stitch, catching a few strands on the back. And this is really easy because it just pulls it right through and catches it so nicely on that crochet hook when you're knitting that stitch. Okay, so we've got two on this one. Again, just catch that stitch closest to the end on the hook, pull it through the other one, and you'll see all your stitches that you just cast off or bind off right here. So we've got one stitch left on each side. You're going to knit that last stitch onto your crochet hook, catch a few strands, oops, okay, pull it through again, lift off completely. So now this needle is empty. So now we've just got two left on the crochet hook. Same thing, you're just going to pull this one through that last stitch. Now you've got a little piece here that we're going to finish with. So you've got this last stitch on your hook. Okay, you've got this last stitch here. You can kind of stretch it open a little bit so you can see it better. We're going to take this working yarn and we're just going to feed it through this hole. Now you can use your hook easily by just sort of grasping all that yarn, kind of a big chunk there, onto the needle like this, or you can even get a little bit of a bigger, hook. You can get a little bit of a bigger hook if you need to feed it through. We're just going to grasp all this and we're going to pull it through this hole. So you're just going to go like this and take it, pull it through the hole, and just you can take your hook out at this point and just pull the rest of that through the hole. Last stitch. Okay, so here's your last stitch right here. Now what we're going to do to completely finish the scarf is we're just going to tie a knot in this strand that's left, and I'm going to position that knot over right on top of this last stitch. So I'm just going to tie a knot securely, make sure it's nice and tight once you're finished. Place that knot on top of that last stitch so it covers it completely. There's no way for it to feed back through and come undone. You're just going to really pull this nice and tight. Once that's completed, you're going to have a few inches left. Once you've pulled this really, really tight, leave about an inch or so, maybe about a finger width, and then just clip this right here. It's going to look the same after you clip it. It's going to look the same as the other end, and once you shake down your scarf, this is going to be clipped and completely hidden underneath like so, like the other end. And that knot up inside there gets completely hidden. Okay? So this is just a small sample of the scarf. This is just the one skein. That's about a yard long or so. But this is what your scarf will look like when it's completed. You can shake it either direction, and those spirals and ruffles just fall. So when you kind of split it in half in the middle when you're going to wear it and around your neck, they fall nicely around your around both sides. Okay? And that is your ruffle scarf with the Lion brand Imagine yarn. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Please email me at YvetteMariesFineArt@gmail.com. I will post that email address in the comments below. I get lots of emails and I'm very happy to answer them. Please keep checking back on my YouTube channel or subscribe. I have a lot of videos I have coming in the near future and continuously, and I'm really excited to make them for you guys. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.